Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes. Crisis on Infinite Earths, Issue 1, Part 1. Welcome back to Crisis Tapes. I'm Adam Murdough.
I'm Peter Rios.
That's right, the original co-hosts back in the saddle again. And this is a hotly anticipated moment in Crisis Tapes history when this is a podcast devoted to the discussion of a single 12-issue maxi-series. And I know you're not a fan of that term, Peter, but it's right there on the front cover, so we got to acknowledge it sometime.
Oh, no. I like maxi-series. I just don't like when they call like a 6-issue or 5-issue.
Oh, okay. So you want it strictly defined as a 12-issue series. And
yeah, I think it...
Nothing else will do.
I think 8, even, I want to say like there was an 8-issue maxi-series. Like even that I could go for, But,
yeah, that just kind of sounds like puffery.
Yeah.
But this is the maxi-series of all maxi-series, folks. The 12-issue maxi-series, Crisis on Infinite Earths. This podcast is devoted to nothing but that, and now we finally get around, after how many years, to talking about an actual issue of that maxi-series.
December 6th, 2009 was our first episode, and here we are, episode 10.
Yeah, about, 5 years and a month later. But better late than never. After all, time is fluid and relative, as Crisis, among many, many, many other fictional texts, should have taught us. So, let's just pretend you stepped through a time warp underneath some red skies, and we did this like 5 years ago. And
what better timing? More or less.
Ah, yes, in this great anniversary year. Because, and I've cited this several times over the past couple of months, Peter, but I remember you saying that, as Crisis kid that you are, first-generation Crisis fan, you've said that you can remember picking up the first issue to this series like in the last week of 1984?
Somewhere around there. I wish, those notes that I kept, they don't quite go to this time period. I think the farthest back that my notes go of me purchasing comics week to week, it's somewhere around Crisis number 10 or so. But yeah, I can remember this being a winter comic, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. I often remember, I think of X-Men Alpha, for example, as a winter comic.
Oh.
As I'm sure I picked that up either in January or February of 1995.
Yeah, and it's, I know that's the big thing going around because Convergence is coming out in April, and everybody's saying, oh, that's the 30th anniversary of Crisis, and that's the cover date.
Right, April 85, but
it's not the actual date. It's not when it actually hit the stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even the date in story, right, which I assume we'll get to. It's not even the date that the story takes place.
Is there a date given?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. When they go up to the satellite, it says July 1985. Or is it July or is it June? Hold on.
See, these are the things we're trying to pay attention to here on the Crisis Tapes.
Yep, there it is, July 1985.
Right.
And they did that because that way they could tell this story in a little bit of months ahead of time, while their books were actually reflecting a couple months back.
Ah, that makes perfect sense. So it's not just to build excitement in the readers that they're peering into the future. It's to give them an out to explain why the regular DC Universe comics are continuing business as usual.
Yeah, just to give them a chance to catch up. And I think that's thinking ahead on some of the later issues and what was going on across the line. You can see how all of a sudden more of the tie-ins start to come in later in this maxi-series run.
All right, so here we are, much closer to the actual 30th anniversary of Crisis number 1, Suck It, Convergence. And so I guess we ready to get down to business?
Yeah, I guess we should. How about we go through just a little bit real quick for who knows, maybe this is the first time someone is hearing.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah, this whole thing. And the very first couple of episodes, we just sort of talked about our own personal reasons for delving into this monumental story and why it affected us, and then we went on to explain certain elements that are unique to not only this event but to DC itself. The word crisis, the multiverse, the various Earths. We did a our top 5 favorite multiverse stories pre-crisis. And then the last 4 episodes, and the last 2 were hosted by Adam. They delve into all of the appearances of the Monitor in the DC universe across all their titles prior to this first issue, as a way to kind of give a status quo of what was going on in each character's book or each team's book.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Also gives us a chance to chart the developing work-in-progress characterization of the Monitor and his aide Lila.
Right.
Who were, in the early stages of their development, clearly much different from the characters that finally appeared in the Crisis series.
Right. So those 9 episodes are great because there might be some things that we may not go into quite as much detail, because we're assuming that maybe you've listened to those, and there are only 9 episodes. Some of them are long, but we'll make sure to, as a true footnotes episode. If you don't know what that is, we'll go through cover to cover, page by page, panel by panel, giving all of our thoughts, breaking down why things are happening, and it's not just about, this character first appeared in blah, 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 and that's all we talk about. No, there are reasons, there are ideas that, of all the annotations that I've seen out there, they only go so far, and sometimes I think they could go even further. So that's our job.
And may we do it well.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, fingers crossed, knocking on wood, and so forth. So, anyway, what's past this prologue? Now, the end of history begins. All right, so I guess the best place to begin would be the cover, wouldn't you say? Yeah,
and we'll be introduced to all these characters inside the book, so we can hit that when it happens. But there are some things in here that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and say some things as well. I think it's really interesting, the layout of this cover, especially considering what just broke today in terms of comic news with Marvel's announcement of a new Secret Wars. I mean, we've known this for a while now, but they had some big news today, whatever.
Right. The similarity of Alex Ross's painted cover to the first issue to cover to Crisis #1 has been obvious to a lot of us for a while.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny, but it has. I don't remember many other homages to this cover. But I was looking at that Alex Ross cover, and I swear if you turn Crisis #1 upside down, the Thing is right where Alexander Luthor Sr. is. And I'm almost wondering if like he said, I'm going to do that cover, but I'm going to flip it or reverse it. It's really kind of eerie, but besides that, so what do you think? What do you think? Do you remember the first time you saw this cover?
I can remember when I obtained my copy of the first issue, and which I'm holding in my hand right now, and so I am using my single issues for this. Are you doing the same? Yep. Yeah, I have my hardcover along with me. It might be fun to look at a couple of the things that some of the core agenda, the things that were changed from the original print run to the collected edition. But I am looking at the first issue. I picked it up at the first comic show. I hesitate to call it a convention because it really wasn't one. It's just one of those shows that they used to have at the Sheraton Hotel around the Reading area. It's in Wyomissing. This would have been, 1994, I want to say, something like that. About the same time of year, too, January, February. And I look at that metallic ink on the front, the special DC Comics 50th anniversary logo with the DC bullet as the 0 and then a 5 next to it to match, and the band across the front, the top of the cover that says 12-part maxi-series. was all shiny, and this is in the 90s, of course, when my head was filled with dancing dreams of hollow foil covers and all that good stuff. So it kind of appealed to me. And so this comic wasn't even 10 years old yet when I first purchased it. But as we've covered in earlier episodes when we did our own little crisis confessionals talking about our personal connections to the series, I can remember reading in many an issue of Who's Who in the DC Universe that I picked up at used bookstores. Reading about the so-called Crisis on Infinite Earths and how its events had changed the lives of so many characters and erased the lives of others. And so I felt like I was holding something of really terrific import in my hands, and just watching and the visual layout of the cover really drives home what a disaster that this story was intended to be. A cosmic, like Irwin Allen quality times a million disaster. Because it just shows just a huge chain of planets Earth crashing into each other, bits breaking off, crushing into rubble, little plumes of energy bursting out of the globes as they collide, and all streaming away into a big white spot of nothingness up in the upper left. And really, the mere fact that this was given two, both the front and back covers, it's a 2-page length cover image is special enough, because here's where I turn to you, Peter, with your Crisis Kid inside knowledge. Were front and back covers very common in comics in the mid-'80s?
You had them in similar, or I should say in more special things. I'm thinking of like Frank Miller's Ronin, had a front and back cover treatment. I want to say one of his Daredevils did as well during his first run prior to Born Again. And beyond that, I would say I want to say Superman 400 might have had a front and back cover. And beyond that, I think they probably saved it for special occasions more than anything.
Well, goodness knows if this didn't deserve it, nothing did.
Yeah.
And getting back to what I was saying a moment ago, just the fact that, all right, so we've got all this huge string of Earths being destroyed in the background, and the heroes in the foreground, and also some smaller figures in the background. They're just kind of strewn randomly all over the place. This being a Perez cover, of course, no detail is accidental. It's all very well coordinated, but the fact that they're all just kind of, nobody has their footing, they're all just tumbling helplessly in the void, trying to reach out to one another, writhing in agony and confusion and despair, and this is not a bunch of heroes and villains posing triumphantly. It's not a case of good guy versus bad guy. This is not a battle or a war that's going on here. This is being framed from the outset as a disaster. It's not exactly it's an natural disaster. Right. And there is a certain ideology, a certain discursive rhetoric going on in the background there, which we'll probably get into as our discussion of the series continues. But the fact that this is not being shown as the heroes versus a massive threat to their existence, which of course is what would ultimately be revealed to be the case. But at this point, as far as anybody knows, this is happening for no good reason, which makes the events here all the more terrifying. The heroes have not yet, and even some villains, as the line between hero and villain will blur somewhat, as we will see as we talk about this first issue. But the characters, the protagonists, whether hero or villain, they don't have a definite foe to fight just yet. It just increases, it heightens the sense of the unknown, this really terrifying idea that we're up against some kind of unknown threat and that things really will never be the same again.
Yeah, and it if you're in a DC mind frame, you're already noticing things. Again, I know we'll talk about it inside, but just as a cover image, you're being subjected to not only different Earths, but different time periods of different Earths. You have your multiverse characters with the Crime Syndicate, but you have your if you're a fan of Legion of Superheroes, you're looking at Dawnstar. If you read Arion at this time, Lord of Atlantis, they're from probably the two major extremes of time that DC is putting out at that time. I think it says like 45,000 years ago versus the 30th century. So it's interesting in that factor too, that that's why it's Crisis on Infinite Earths. Not Crisis on Earth 3, not Crisis on Earth 1 and 2, Infinite Earths, and they are all more or less. There's not all of them, but that's giving you a big hint when you look at this cover. And this was a cover image that we did see prior to actually it being on the stands, because of one of the last ad prior to this issue hitting showed this image. And it actually showed a couple of the first panels on page 1, and then on the bottom it showed this image. So,
oh, yes.
Because there were... Go ahead.
Was there also a silhouette of the Monitor in a couple of those?
That was the first ad. It was just the silhouette of the Monitor, and it said, what does it say? Like, he's been he's been monitoring the DC universe for many, many months. Now you'll find out why. And then the second one, I'm putting it up here. All right, so the first ad, for the past 12 months, he has been monitoring the DC universe, watching, waiting, scheming. Now you will find out why. And it says DC Universe, Crisis on Infinite Earth. So it's a whole other treatment, logo treatment. It's not even the same one. Yeah.
Whole other title.
Yeah.
Crisis on Infinite Earths used to be the subtitle.
Yeah. And then it said the DC Universe will never be the same. Then the second one was the most eagerly awaited comic book event in 50 years. Worlds will live, worlds will die, and that's only the beginning. And again, DC Universe, Crisis on Infinite Earths. And then the third one was actually, I'm not finding it in my Google search, but it did show the image of the first cover. So it's interesting to see that development happening in the ads. Another note I had about this is, unless you saw, there was a comic magazine that had some previews of, I guess it had Perez's initial designs of Harbinger and Pariah. Now, in all those monitoring the Monitor episodes, have we seen Harbinger's look prior to this issue?
I do not believe Lila became Harbinger in any of them.
Okay.
Yeah, there was, just depending on how we want to treat chronological order here, there was eventually a Tales of the Teen Titans issue where she shows up to recruit Simon as Harbinger, but that was published much, much later.
Right.
So, because where we discover that Simon was actually one of the first characters that the Monitor brought aboard his satellite, the first to be summoned. Right. And then we'll see him eventually in the first issue just kind of lingering on the sidelines, watching as all the other characters arrive.
Yeah. And then, but I do remember, I want to say it was a Comic Scene magazine, SCENE. Mm-hmm. There was a magazine called Comic Scene. Mm-hmm. That's where you could have seen Pariah, maybe either before this issue or outside of this issue. So, I mean, looking at this cover, if you didn't see any promo image, you have no idea who those two characters are, Harbinger or Pariah. Totally new to the DC universe, and the little silhouette of Monitor's face behind her. Interesting little details that you won't really get until you delve in.
But I think the image seen in that Comic Scene magazine of Pariah's first design pics, I think it's reproduced inside the back cover.
Oh, cool.
Of issue number 1.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's right. You're right.
Yep. It's one of those little things that you miss, folks, if you read these things in collection.
Yep.
Go ye and seek out the back issues.
And let me see. There was something else I wanted to... It is also interesting to note, and again, I will deal with this when we get into it, that outside of Legion of Superheroes, New Teen Titans, and I guess you can say All-Star Squadron, or maybe Firestorm, None of the biggies are here. None of DC's big sellers are here. Again, outside of Legion was big, New Teen Titans was a big seller, Firestorm was a big seller, and so was All-Star Squadron. But there's no Batman, there's no Wonder Woman, there's no Justice League represented. You know what I mean? Like, it's really interesting that they aren't using their heavy hitters.
Yeah, and I think I can speak to that too. There's one of the points I made in my thesis, and again, for those of you who are just tuning in now, I actually wrote my master's thesis on the subject of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was back in 2006. I have it sitting here on the table in front of me. It's like 152 pages long, counting bibliography and notes and all of that stuff. And the basic, the thesis statement was that DC used the Crisis on Infinite Earths story as a kind of apocalyptic rhetoric, using the language of apocalypse stories and narratives as seen in mythology, biblical and ancient, like Greek, Norse especially, and so forth, as a way of a form of apocalyptic propaganda, really, to secure longtime fans' approval for this grand project of self-reinvention they were embarking on back in the mid-'80s, and also by framing it in the form of this big apocalypse myth. For their DC Comics mythology, they were, by doing it in a story-based means, they were giving fans a kind of closure. This was like one of the writers I quoted in the thesis described it as an elaborate death ritual for the entire DC universe. I argued that one reason why they were at pains to use, well, for one thing, they were trying to showcase the total diversity of the DC multiverse as much as possible. What you mentioned earlier, Peter, about how they were demonstrating the historical range, the range in time covered by the settings of their comics and characters. So we go from 45,000 years ago with Arion to the 30th century AD with Dawnstar of the Legion. And it went even further than that. They go as far back as Anthro the Cave Boy at other points in the series, and as far forward in time to the Lord of Time in the year 1 billion AD, or whenever his stronghold is. But so they're trying to just to show you exactly how much diversity there is in the DC continuity right before they pare away a bunch of the fat, as they thought of it, and just streamlined everything down to one timeline and one universe. But in the course of doing this, they were at pains not to make this too much a story about any one character, which brings us back to your point, Peter, about how these how they weren't using any of their heavy hitters right off the bat. I mean, there is a Superman, but he's an alternate Superman. There's actually two alternate Supermen on the cover, and just a representative of the Justice League, but he's one of the second-tier members, Firestorm. A representative of the Teen Titans, but he's one of their villains. And there's an Infinity Inc. person and an All-Star Squadron person, but so in order to prevent this from being too much a Superman story or too much a Flash story or too much a Batman story, this was meant to be a DC Universe story, or a DC multiverse story, if you will, the last DC multiverse story. So, in order to prevent any one character from dominating the narrative, they just diversified the cast as much as possible, and also laid many of the important narrative functions of the story on these unknowns, these newly created characters, which, again, as you said, Peter, are featured prominently here on the front cover, but would probably not be recognized by most people. Even those who were reading DC Comics at that time, if they hadn't seen that house ad or read that article in Comic Scene or seen any of the other, pre-series promotional publications or news items in the fan press that DC had allowed to get out there. So yeah, that's one of the points I made in the thesis, was that this was as opposed to the traditional the Joseph Campbell style hero monomyth. This is more of a hero multi-myth. It's a story not about any one superhero or villain character, but about an entire system of hero and villain characters. So the decentralization of the typical hero myth tale type of one monolithic hero figure. Instead, we've got a whole passel of heroic figures, many of whom are not really heroes by the traditional definition at all. So that's what we're seeing here, a whole mess of characters, different time periods, different parallel universes, and different moral codes, because several of them are just, on this cover, are straight-up villains.
Very true.
All right, so I guess we'll throw a mention out to the text piece. There was actually a letters column in Crisis. It was called Crisis Mail, and in the space that it ordinarily would take up, which is the inside of front and back covers, we get a little essay called Crisis Beginnings by writer Marv Wolfman, in which he relates, he explains from the perspective of DC editorial. He kind of lays out the party line of the hows and whys of the Crisis story. Why the DC powers that be of the mid '80s felt that it was necessary to go about simplifying and streamlining the continuity and eliminating all the parallel universes. It's a story that's been told many times over, but it's kind of interesting to hear the first-hand account from the primary architect of the whole project, Wolfman himself.
Who I forever in my notes call the Wolfman.
Oh, because of Animal Man?
Yep.
Did the Wolfman send you?
Yeah.
That's a quote directly from the Psycho Pirate, folks.
That's all right. I have nothing really to say about the text piece, so if there's anything else.
No, not really. It's like I said, it's just Wolfman explaining why DC thought they needed to do all of this.
Right.
And whether you agree with their arguments or not, it's out there. Take a look at it and let Wolfman speak for himself.
Yeah.
So then, on the first page, this story begins.
The origin of, well, and right away it's like throwing me. I already have a question about this page. So basically, what it is this is it's the Big Bang, more or less. Maybe not. It certainly feels that way. I mean, it's very biblical in the sense that the very first three words are "in the beginning."
Oh yes, no doubt.
Yeah, and you could look at this as the origin of the DC universe, the origin of DC multiverse, in a 4-panel page that has been replicated, or at least has also been sort of touched on as recently as Jonathan Hickman's Avengers even. He kind of even brought his own sort of twist to this opening of these 4 panels here. Boy, how do we want to do this? There's so much to this first page, and short of reading it, which is not what we want to do. But
well, sure.
What do you have?
I think we should read it actually.
Okay, go ahead.
It's important. I mean, it's important to the core ideological project of the whole series. So,
okay.
Actually, I think I'm going to turn this over to the 2006 me for a little bit here and read the first. I'll call me self-indulgent, but I have my thesis here with me, and I'd like to read a few passages from it here and there where appropriate. Okay. Just because I'm sure I put a lot of thought into my analysis of this series back then, and I'm sure the 2006 me knows what he's talking about better than I do now. So let's hear what he has to say about this first page, which is a real tone setter for the whole series. Okay. Mircea Eliade, that's one of the writers on Apocalypse Myth, whom I cited in my thesis. Mircea Eliade writes that the cosmic myth of origin and creation serves as the exemplary model for any ritual observance whose end is the restoration of integral wholeness, which is precisely what Crisis on Infinite Earths was intended to accomplish in the DC universe, and that creation myths are therefore ceremonially repeated on those occasions. He also notes that the mythical visions of the beginning and the end of time are homologues. Thus, it is unsurprising that Crisis on Infinite Earths opens with an account of the origin myth of the DC Comics multiverse that is about to die. I will quote this one-page prologue in full. In the beginning there was only one, a single black infinitude, so cold and dark for so very long that even the burning light was imperceptible. But the light grew and the infinitude shuddered, and the darkness finally screamed, as much in pain as in relief. For in that instant a multiverse was born, a multiverse of worlds vibrating and replicating, and a multiverse that should have been one became many. Note the conspicuous appropriation of biblical language and tone in the beginning, as you have already noted, Peter, and the subtle ideological inflection of the phrasing, most particularly the words, a multiverse that should have been one. This phrase takes for granted that there is, and always has been, something inherently flawed and unnatural about the multiversal structure of the DC universe. DC's multitude of parallel Earths, instituted in the 1960s in response to fan concerns about continuity, but perceived in the 1980s as a threat to the company's commercial viability, is here singled out as an aberration, a dangerous anomaly that compromises all of existence. This sentiment is repeated a few times over during the story in a rather transparent attempt to guide the reader into accepting that the imminent destruction of the multiverse is meant to happen in order to correct something that went wrong long ago in the familiar world of DC Comics. So there's my thoughts from 9 years ago about all of that.
Well, and some interesting things there. So did we, as readers, I'm trying to think, has that notion ever been brought up prior to what you just said, that notion that the multiverse is more or less a mistake? I'm thinking of some All-Star Squadron stories where the Spectre is holding two Earth X and Earth 2 apart, I
had that same image in my head now that you
mentioned it. I wondered if he ever sort of went off on this little tangent of,
Not if Roy Thomas was writing him.
Okay.
Because Roy Thomas was all about the multiverse.
Oh, sure. That's very true. Yeah. So that's an interesting notion that you threw out there, the idea that, because that's something I know we talked about in a previous episode, is this whole idea, spoilers, I guess, more or less, but not really, that really, if you think about it, they in essence lost this battle. What they were trying to save these Earths and save these worlds, and what winds up happening by the end is that it all gets meshed into one in a very alien world that they have no idea who's alive, no idea what part of their history is around, and they kind of lost this battle more or less, because the Wolfman wanted it so,
Yes, and the phrase I keep coming back to, which was I must credit to Crisis chronologist is what I'm trying to say, yeah, and a footnoter, John Woodward, who created the annotated Crisis website. He observed that the post-Crisis DC universe was built on a foundation of corpses. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a kind of a major loss for the good guys, and what you were talking about, the massive global scale identity crisis everybody was experiencing, it certainly didn't feel like the natural state of affairs to them, at least not at first.
Right. Now, a couple things here with this. Okay, so if we're to take this at face value, that there's a darkness. Let me go here. It feels very Big Bang-esque, right? From nothing came everything.
Right. It's very, very Big Bang-esque, but also, as you observed earlier, very much like the biblical fiat lux. And then there was, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Right. So going along those lines, what's always interesting is prior to this, and certainly within this maxi-series, especially in later issues, we're always brought back to this idea that researching the origins of the DC universes causes major destruction. And the image that we're always brought back to is this giant hand in a swirling galactic mist, or whatever you want to call it. And that's like the earliest origin of the DC universe. So I find it interesting that that's not what we're being presented here with.
Well, that image does turn up later on, of course, but yeah, it is kind of unusual that that has been omitted.
So that leads me to think a couple of things. Okay, so is Marv Wolfman just quickly going through different beats? So, you have the origin of the universe in general, but then the creation of the multiverse, which technically doesn't happen, which we'll find out later, until Krona, one of the Owens, one of the precursors of the Guardians of the Universe, starts delving into the origins of the universe, and that's where two things happen, right? We find this out later. It's creation of the multiverse, and it's the creation of evil, more or less, within the universe. So in between panel 2 and panel 3, are we to assume that maybe they're just skipping over those details because we'll find them out later? Why aren't we presented with the hand? Are we not presented with the hand because it did not happen in DC history yet? Especially if we go later in this series where it becomes the anti-Monitor's hand that is the hand that technically, you see where I'm going with this?
Actually, I'm not sure I do.
Okay, so, and I knew this was going to happen. As the minute I read this first page, I went, "Oh my God, I'm gonna have to talk about a later issue." So when the anti-Monitor goes back in time, and it's like issue 10. I don't know, 10. Thank you. Okay,
it was issue 10. Death at the Dawn of Time.
Right. So he goes back in time, and he is there in that white, just nothingness, and he puts his hand up, and all of a sudden you see that same famous image.
Right. He boasts that mine will be the hand seen cradling the nascent universe, or whatever the exact wording was. Yeah, I know that scene.
Okay, yeah, and you can see Krona's viewer appearing out of nothingness and looking at the hand, and then eventually what happens is the Spectre, more or less has an arm wrestling match with him. But this I'm not trying to say that this is what Wolfman is saying. I'm sort of pulling it out of the story and knowing what's going to happen later. If in our reading of this first issue, the anti-Monitor going back in time hasn't happened yet. So his hand hasn't been viewed yet, because that takes place at issue 10. But issue 1, because we're seeing the birth of the universe, birth of the DC universe, but what we're really seeing is just light out of blackness, and that's not what we're going to be shown later to be the origin of the DC universe. So I was trying to mix the two, try to make sense of, well, why are we doing it this way if in issue 7 it's told us that Krona looks back and he sees, and Pariah does it too, and he goes back and they see a hand. And that's something, I just think it's kind of interesting that, I'm not saying that this is what it is, but it could be an interesting time loop parallel thing that is really the anti-Monitor's hand. Technically, is it not? I think there's something interesting about why are we shown this origin here, yet that's not this origin we're going to see later.
Well, this might just be my stubborn theism coming into play here, but my thinking is that that hand, the hand of creation, is the anti-Monitor's hand once, but it isn't always. And I think if we looked at this first page and the events going on here, if the camera were to pull back a little bit, so to speak, and the everything, if we zoomed out from this image a little bit, we'd see the image of the light from the blackness and the fireballs that eventually cool and form the planets and the spinning multiple Earths. We would probably see that this is all happening in the palm of a hand that is too macrocosmically huge to be seen on this page. Instead, it surrounds this page. So yeah, I insist on believing that there is the universe or multiverse, whichever way you want to put it, is resting in the palm of somebody's hand, and it ain't the anti-Monitors.
Fair enough. I just wanted to throw it out there. I thought it was, when I thought about it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why are we not? And then my other thought was, and this one I didn't research, but maybe you could throw something to it.
I'll try.
How does this relate in hindsight with the origin of the DC universe that we got with Blackest Night?
Well, I haven't read large chunks of Blackest Night, so or I haven't yet read large chunks of Blackest Night, so I don't know if I can even really answer that. Well, what kind of origin were we told then?
Well, the whole thing with the white light being part of it, and the white light entity, and the darkness and Necron and all that. I think they I'd have to go back to, and maybe this is something a listener who's maybe read it more recently, or they can sort of pick up on. But I thought it would be interesting to compare the two.
Paging Cage Gnarly. Sounds
Yeah.
like that'd be right up his alley. But yeah, Jeff Clock did pretty much what Marv Wolfman did here in 1985. Clock went ahead and did, and did I say Jeff Clock? Good grief, Jeff Johns went ahead and did with Blackest Night later on, which is to play fast and loose with the established DC chronology, pull back a couple of curtains, zoom back the camera, to reuse a metaphor, and just show us that the shape of the origins of the DC universe aren't quite what we thought they were, because the writer of the story we're reading right now says so.
Right.
So just as Wolfman took established truths of DC continuity and subtly inflected them and sometimes outright wrenched them out of place to suit his needs, Johns did kind of the same thing later on. That is how storytelling sometimes has to work in a serialized medium.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, heck, speaking of the things that Wolfman was taking out of whack, I mentioned this on the last Time Bubble I recorded some 6 months ago. I actually talked about Green Lantern Volume 2, Number 40, which was the story that introduced Krona and the role he played in the birth of the DC universe and and of the antimatter universe. And it actually did not, even though Alan Scott of Earth 2 was he made an appearance in that issue. It was kind of an Alan Scott versus Hal Jordan story. The Earth 2 was kind of incidental to the main plot of the story. We learned that Krona looked back in time and he created. He was, as you said earlier, Peter, he was responsible for the release of evil into the positive matter universe. Nothing was said in that story about Krona's experiments being the cause of the creation of the multiverse. That is something that Wolfman chose to graft on to the original story from Green Lantern number 40. He decided he would just take that as the origin of the Guardians and the Green Lantern Corps and make it also the origin of the entire multiverse concept that he was in the process of eliminating. So lots of revisionist history going on.
Yeah, that's not the only revision that he'll tack on, but that's for a later issue.
Yeah, one thing at a time.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I had for that first page. But boy, that was a lot.
All right. Page 2.
2 and 3, probably.
Yeah, 2. Right. It is a 2-page spread. That was then. This is the planet Earth. A planet Earth.
Right.
Nothing really exceptional about it. No superhero characters that we as the readers are shown. Some fan chroniclers have suggested Earth 5 as a name for this nameless Earth. But it's the first one that we see die in the Crisis series.
Right, yeah. This 2-page spread more or less is getting us familiar with how things are going to happen, how the destruction of these Earths are going to happen. From the very first panel to the last, it is a textbook visual description of what every Earth is going through. A white, at this point, nameless cloud destroying the Earth, usually a big city, mass panic, a showcase of how somebody could die if they get absorbed into this wall, and then this eventual white nothingness being absorbed by black nothingness, I guess you could say. So, and then in the midst of it, we're introduced to the first of our main. If you want to think of the Crisis having a main core set of characters, definitely Pariah is one of them,
without a doubt.
Yeah. So, a nice way to introduce him without also having to deal with, as you said, other superheroes. Give him his little spotlight and sort of give the readers a view of, okay, this is what's going on.
Yeah, this double-page spread is one of the first things I think of when I think of Crisis, and certainly Crisis number 1. It's just it's the fact that it is so basic, by the numbers of textbook, as you put it. It establishes the motif that will be encountered over and over again in various variations for the rest of the series. But it's the purest expression, I think, of the the death process of the various universes of the DC multiverse, the death rattle of the multiverse, as Pariah calls it. So we get the white wall, we get the fraying effect as buildings and cities and streets, and it all just kind of crumbles. It's almost like it's being digested. It's being broken down into bits, and then it just disappears. It's dissolved into the antimatter, which we don't know that's what the white stuff is yet, but it is. And just that big panel at the middle of the page that stretches from the left edge of page 2 to the right edge of page 3. Of all these people, now not superheroes or supervillains, nothing like that, but just people running in terror for their lives, young and old all together. Just the two younger guys jumping on top of the cabs in their haste to get away. It's a scene of terror, panic, and chaos, and it's very well done, very, very well. I'd even say very well cinematographed by George Perez, because this is the sort of thing in which he excels. Well, one of many things at which he excels as an artist. Just this layout here, and the way it's the body language of the characters as they flee. It puts you in the right frame of mind. It bespeaks the disaster movie genre, and that's what this is. This story is really on one level. It can be read as a disaster movie. It's got all the mythological resonances and the cosmic import and all of that. But on one level, it's just a story about lots and lots of horrible, disastrous things happening and untold quadrillions of people across infinite Earths and the other planets contained in the parallel universes of the DC multiverse being completely eradicated, making the culprit of this whole thing, when he's finally revealed, stand out as the worst mass murderer, the multiple genocidist in DC's entire fictional history. But but this really brings it down to the personal level to begin with, though. It puts us through the paces. It shows us how the death of a universe goes in the Crisis story. The white wall, the breaking down of matter, then everything is just reduced to white nothingness, and then the black nothingness.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, let's see. Would you mind if I let the thesis say a few words again?
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay. So since this is the pattern that's been stated here, and okay. This image of universal megadeath by reality-negating antimatter is a very important symbol. Described variously as a nothingness and an emptiness within the text, the antimatter wave, and again, we haven't heard it described as such yet, but we know that that's what it is, represents not merely destruction, but nullity, total non-existence, to which its victims, being comic book characters, are dangerously close to begin with. Indeed, the white wall of antimatter closely resembles the ultimate figure of nullity for fictional characters, a blank page. Now that comes from Jeff Klock, not Jeff Johns. That's a quote from his book, How to Read Superhero Comics and Why. Well, it's not a direct quote, but it's the idea. He's the one who suggested that the white wall represents a blank page, which is the ultimate threat of non-existence for a fictional character.
Right. That's something that I have in my notes too about not only here, but in a couple pages where we'll see Superwoman disappear, and that was something that Grant Morrison played with in Animal Man too, where characters were sort of like that Looney Tunes cartoon where Daffy Duck was erased.
Duck-a-muck.
These characters are basically regressed to simple line work. Like when they actually, like, look at that boy. He's got color, he's got detail. Then when he hits the cloud, it's really just the blue line work of an outline of a person. And I know that happened with one of the characters in Animal Man. He his color was taken out of him, and then the inking was taken, and then he just became shapes. Just artist triangles and circles that you use to start drawing a figure. So this whole idea, as you say, it's literal. It's not killing them; it's wiping them out of existence with probably no memory, right? And that's exactly what this whole Crisis thing, I made a joke of this whole thing about saying the Wolfman, but it makes you wonder, did he really know what he was doing by creating something called an antimatter wall or cloud that wasn't just killing these people, but literally wiping them from DC Comics in some version or another? You know, I think it's just really interesting.
Yeah, the metatextual symbolism is potent, to say the least.
Yeah.
All right. Let me dip back into the thesis again here. Okay. Just as water is the primal medium from which real human life emerged, the blank page is the primal medium for superheroes, and so in both the biblical flood and in Crisis on Infinite Earths, beings are reabsorbed by their birthing element with only a chosen few spared. Here's where we move on to that row of panels at the bottom, which are also kind of interesting in their own way. In apocalypse narratives that are less peculiarly keyed to the world of superheroes, blackness might make a better symbol of non-being than whiteness, as a reference to the eternal primordial night, or nox, named in Greek mythology and elsewhere as the original null state of creation. However, since in Crisis whiteness signifies absence or non-being, then blackness instead signifies presence. And indeed, the black mists that appear following the destruction of each Earth in the opening scene seem to creep in a slow, deliberate manner, as if guided by a sinister intelligence, an image rendered all the more menacing by the eerie lack of narrative captions, which are almost irritatingly common elsewhere in the text, in the panels that depict it. The symbolism of the blackness is not merely one of annihilation and nullity, but of malice, of evil intent, of the presence of a definite enemy. In short, it is foreshadowing, in a rather literal sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we get there. We don't always see the blackness creep in to replace the whiteness, but we see it here on this the death of this first universe, and we'll see it a couple of other times too. And it's sort of meant to give you the idea that there is an intelligence directing all of this. And the fact that there are no narrative captions there to tell you what to make of this makes it all the more creepy.
Well, and it connects to that first image. If out of nothingness came this white light, well, now we're going backwards in a sort of a sense. And as we'll find out later, you can't. The destruction of a positive matter Earth or universe has to be filled with something, and we will find out later that it's an expansion of the antimatter universe. So, is that what we're seeing in that blackness as it's coming in, or is it just meant to, or really is it really just meant to be nothingness? Like, is it in issue 11 where they take the cosmic treadmill and try to go to Earth 2, and there's nothing there. It's just
a sucking void.
Yeah, it's a really, and it's also, again, to sort of get too heady with it, but who is witnessing the blackness? Obviously we readers, but and maybe the anti-monitor, but
right, even Pariah's gone by that point, so it really is just us.
Yeah. I love the panels, the close-up of Pariah's eye. It's such a Perez art thing. You get a full body shot of him, then you get his hand, and he brings down the cloak, and now you get closer to his face, and then it's up on his eye, and it's very sunken in with black circles around it. And I love that little storytelling thing that Perez is throwing in there with all that dialogue. Dialogue that is also very interesting because even Pariah doesn't have the language for this yet. Even though we're going to know that he's been going over this over and over again, he calls it the plague. He says swallowed by the dark. He doesn't even really have language for what's going on.
Yeah, because he hasn't had the whole thing explained to him yet. Yeah. Eventually he learns that it's the monitor's fault that he has to relive this over and over and over again. But at this point, you're right. He's as much in the dark as anybody else.
Yeah. And by the way, it's page 3, and we've already had the word multiverse used 3 times.
So, in this story?
Yeah, in just these 3 pages.
I was about to say, if we went back and counted how many times you and I have said the word multiverse in just the 55 minutes we've been recording so far.
Yeah.
Staggering.
All right, that's all I have for those 2 pages.
All right, fair enough. Oh, and let me point out another smart guy thing here. The Pariah here seems to be serving the function a kind of, well, he's a herald of the apocalypse. He's like one of the final signs that in many apocalyptic traditions always presage the end of the world. So the appearance of this green-cloaked figure is kind of serving that purpose here. He also, along with a couple of other characters in this series, most of them created for the purpose, him, Harbinger, Alex Luthor, he's kind of a psychopomp figure, which in mythology it's like a spirit guide, often a deity, who's associated in many mythologies with the conduction of souls to like the realm of the dead. So he shows up, and your universe is about to be conducted to the realm of the dead.
Oh, I would also want to take note of the last thing he says on this page. The last few balloons. He says, all right, I'm disappearing again. Another Earth is to be swallowed by the dark, and I must attend, as I have the hundreds which have died before it. Wow. I don't know how...
Drop the bomb.
Yeah. I'm pretty far into the reading of these issues. I've been taking some notes. And one of the things that keeps coming up is this idea of just how many universes have died. I know it says Crisis on Infinite Earths, but there's a very real, specific count that we're going to come across in I don't know if it's in this issue or in later issues. So I just took notice of this now, that he's saying hundreds, and that number is going to tip all over the scale. So it'll be interesting to keep note of just how many Earths have died.
An infinite amount. That's how many. It's right there in the title.
No, it's there in the title, but it's not there in the narrative.
I know. I'm being silly.
I know.
But
all right.
yeah, but to Pariah at least, it seems like hundreds. I'm sure he's lost count long since, but he's had to do with just the fact that this horrible tableau of cosmic destruction. It's not an isolated incident. That's what we're getting here. It's really it echoes. It's a really, really baleful pronouncement to the reader. It is, oh my God, this has happened lots and lots of times before. How many cool superhero characters that we never got to see have died in all of this?
Yeah.
Oh, and also the fact that he tries to commit suicide. He tries to just let himself die along with this nameless, numberless Earth here on pages 2 and 3, and we see that he doesn't even have that option. Something is forcing him to... something is compelling him, dragging him against his will from the death site of one universe to the death site of the next. We don't know yet what exactly that is, and Pariah doesn't know either, but we will by the time the story's over.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to the next scene then. Page 4. Now we've seen this little nobody backwater Earth with no superheroes to speak of perish, but now the DC fans are being hit where they live. A parallel Earth that's been around for a while, been used in a few stories over the years.
Mm-hmm.
It's Earth 3, first appeared in...
issue 29 of Justice League.
That was when the Crime Syndicate of America, evil criminal versions of the Justice League were introduced.
And that's this is the scene we're getting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So for the next 5 pages, we'll go through page by page, but that's where we're at. Earth 3. In its final death throes, death rattle of its existence. And we're just basically seeing it from a little more personal view from the heroes trying to stop it. Not heroes, I'm sorry. The villains, but acting in a very heroic, maybe you could say selfish way, but there's dialogue to fully admit or to show that they're not being as selfish as you may think. They really are, almost feeling helpless, and trying to save a world, as they say, that they've been trying to conquer for so long. So I think it's again what you said about showing not the importance, but just showing how big this story is. That yes, it's going to affect the heroes, but look at what the villains are up against. Even they have to change who they are or put aside their differences to try to save their world. Mm-hmm. And I think this the scene is interesting for that.
Yep, it's the beginning of a theme too. It's which is basically that when all of existence is on the line, the dividing lines between hero and villain are less clearly drawn. All of a sudden, everybody's on the same side versus this supernatural, extra-human threat to everything that exists. So all of a sudden, or you might also interpret it as their origins as villainous carbon copies of essentially heroic beings coming through here at the end, allowing them to experience a little taste of what might have been if things had happened on Earth 3 closer to the way they happened on Earth 1, for example. All right.
And just how close disaster is to Earth 1, right? If we, most of DC's titles take place on Earth 1. If you were reading DC, it's all about Earth 1. Oh, look, we're at Earth 3. We're not at Earth 206. We're at Earth 3, which is, is also very scary.
And assuming that whoever or whatever is behind all of this is following the top 40 countdown here, Earth is, or the mainstream DC Earth is pretty clear. Its number is pretty nearly up. Okay, the Crime Syndicate have been favorite characters of mine for a long time. I own pretty much all of their appearances. I even have the action figures of them. And I am talking specifically about the pre-Crisis Crime Syndicate.
Right.
I've liked the things that have been done with them since then, Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley's JLA Earth 2 graphic novel, for example. But I've always preferred the original versions of these characters, as visually designed by Mike Sekowsky. And I'm pleased that one of the miniseries coming out of the Convergence event, soon to be published by DC, is going to be about the pre-crisis Earth 3 version of the Crime Syndicate. It'd be fun to see those versions of these characters again. And I actually devoted a little bit of space in my thesis to talking about the deaths of the Crime Syndicate and what it might mean, what symbolism might be at work there. Okay, this is me reading deeply between the lines, but indulge me for a minute here. Okay. However, the deaths of the Crime Syndicate and of Earth 3 have a deeper significance. As Jeff Clock reports, the Crisis series served other purposes beyond the simplification of DC's continuity. Quote, Crisis on Infinite Earths was not designed to simply change the DC universe, but to retroactively restructure it around a new organizing principle, the adult ethos of the 1980s. The very significant demographic shift that made the target audience of the comic book companies 18 to 24-year-old college-educated males. Comic books were now expected to tell stories for adults using the building blocks of children's literature. End quote. In a way, Crisis is a coming-of-age saga, a rite of passage for DC Comics and its fans, a myth of transition not just between historical periods, but from juvenility to maturity. Like Shakespeare's Hamlet, it can be read as an allegory for the violent death of an innocent but no longer practicable way of life. As shadows of the Justice League, the Crime Syndicate are a manifestation of negative human traits that their pristine heroic doubles could not be allowed to have. Traits that were sublimated, expurgated, and projected away from the heroes by their creators, only to resurface with a vengeance on Earth 3. The death of the Crime Syndicate parallels the death of the naive Manichaeanism characteristic of the golden and silver ages of comics, under which good and evil were seen as pure moral absolutes that could be kept separate on either side of the dimensional border between parallel Earths. With the Crime Syndicate gone, the flaws and fallibilities they represent could be reintegrated into the personalities of the Justice League, allowing them to exist as more three-dimensional, internally conflicted, morally complex characters in the years following Crisis. So there you go, the death of the pure evil Crime Syndicate characters, and even the fact that they had to act in a less than purely evil manner here in these pages of Crisis number 1 are a sign that, the superhero comics at DC are beginning to grow up a little bit. There will be more moral ambiguity in the years to come. In the thesis, I also point out that one of the first big hits that DC had in the years following Crisis was Suicide Squad, which is all about straight-up villain characters being forced to act in the interests of, well, if not exactly heroism, then at least the good of the United States in exchange for, lightened sentences and parole and all of that good stuff.
Well, don't forget Dark Knight Returns and talk about moral ambiguity.
Oh, yeah, there's ton of it in it, but
Yeah.
by moral ambiguity, I'm meaning more specifically the line between hero and the roles of hero and villain.
Okay.
Yeah, but your point stands too, of course.
Yeah, but I like that notion, what you said about sort of reintegrating facets of these characters, because, in essence, isn't that what the multiverse was? If you want to think of it in Elseworlds terms, right? Taking these characters that we know and putting them in new scenarios so that they can act in certain ways for a story or a story conceit, or just to see them through a different lens, So I like that idea of reintegrating that. It's very much okay. So if you want to get even deeper with it, it's very much what happens with Harbinger, right? She splits and gets forced upon her later in this issue, a sort of negative being that contaminates the whole. If you want to think of like Jamie Madrox in the Marvel universe, where each time he splits under Peter David later, in the past like 10 years, each facet of each new body has like a new personality to him, right? Each duplicate of Jamie Madrox is different from the whole, and certainly that's a big thing here, right? Each duplicate of the Earth is weaker than it should have been one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that whole reintegration thing is interesting. And then so they reintegrate. I'm just totally just speaking of what you said here. There certainly are people who thought post-crisis that the heroes got a little too gritty, a little too dirty, a little too dark. And if you want to talk about degradation, look at post-Zero Hour, what some of the heroes went through, and then you can go all the way to Flashpoint and the outcome of that. Some people have saying that DC the New 52 was the bleakest it ever was. So it's an interesting sort of little chart. I'm sure somebody could chart this thing, right?
Yeah. We have to put Infinite Crisis on that chart too, because that was all about like a look back at the moral path of the DC universe and its characters since the first crisis.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Superboy Prime and Alex Luthor passing judgment on how far the heroes had fallen in those years, wanting to get things back to the idealized, simpler, purer way that they used to be pre-crisis.
Yeah. It's interesting. To go along with that idea about these characters having to act in a more heroic way, I also thought it was interesting. Perez's artwork really kind of reflects a lot of, he clearly knows. Perez is a master. I mean, this is his magnus opus or whatever it is. He uses the visual language of what he would draw a Superman as for Ultraman. I'm jumping ahead a little bit on page 8 where he turns back to Power Ring, but it's right out of Christopher Reeve winking at the camera.
It totally is.
Yeah, even the face, and there's like a hint of a smile. Power Ring kind of looks like Hal Jordan, but with a slightly bigger forehead. His hair is receding a little bit more, and
a little gaunter.
Yeah,
like the cheekbones protruding a little more long. His face is just generally longer and pointier.
Yeah, and just the way they move, they're not perfect. There's the image of Ultraman flying there on the third panel on page 4. It's a little skewed perspective wise, which is right. It should be. And the way Superwoman holds back that wall of whatever that was, a building or whatever, and it kind of evokes Wonder Woman, but not quite, Visually, I think he's using his knowledge here of letting us know that, these are the characters you think they are, but they're not quite. And we should also note, obviously, if anybody's listened to the footnotes of JLA Avengers, there's a scene very much like this, even in that, where the crime syndicate is kind of like a kickoff point to some major disaster. So it sort of became what you said earlier about creation myths being repeated. There are certain crisis elements that constantly get repeated whenever we get back to that story idea.
Well, it might just be those compelling mythical archetypes just manifesting, willing themselves back into existence. It might just be an example of how those are so deeply embedded in the racial memory that we keep using them over and over again. Or we could interpret it as just a sign of the influence that the Crisis story has had. It's like forged its own subgenre of superhero storytelling with its own set of conventions, which were largely established right here.
Right.
Some of them in this very issue that we're reading. Like on a more superficial level, I like the giant plug that Powering is trying to use to stop the volcano. The bottom of that same page, we get that cool Parisian close-up where we just see Powering's gaunt face and his fist with the sort of a chevron-shaped power ring that he wears. And he's saying, "It's useless. I tell you, we're all going to die." Tight-lipped courage there from the Earth 3 opposite of the guy who's on Earth 1 is supposed to be without fear. And he is totally weak-livered here in these couple of scenes. He's kind of pardon the expression, a whiny bitch.
Yeah.
He's in this scene. And when he and Ultraman show up in that Grant Morrison Animal Man story we keep coming back to, he's kind of written in the same way.
That's a good catch. I also like, coming up in a few pages, there's something very similar to this. The language that Ultraman uses. He says, "I've used my telescopic vision." And then he says, "I've changed the course of mighty oceans. Don't tell me my super strength can't save my adopted planet." If you don't know who Ultraman is, if this is the first time you're seeing these characters, I would have to assume, if you have any familiarity with Superman, that you're going, "Oh, well, this is clearly a Superman character here." I just love that he uses that Wolfman is letting him use dialogue that Superman would use. It's just great. It's really great.
Yeah. And I'm going to make one of what's probably going to be a couple of mentions of a story that was published a few years before this. It was also written by Wolfman, and we touched on it in our top 5 favorite multiverse stories episode. It was DC Comics Presents Annual number 1 from 1982. And that was, I believe, the last Earth 3 story to see print before Crisis. So it was, in effect, the last Earth 3 story, if you don't count Crisis. And Ultraman was a part of that, too. And Wolfman wrote him as a total braggadocio. Okay, so he's like this big, boastful, arrogant brute, none too bright. And stubborn and just bragging on his own. Just kind of like a barbarian warrior chief is kind of the way he talked. And here he is. Some of the edge is taken off of that, but you can still hear the pride and the stubbornness in his voice as he says, "Don't tell me my super strength can't save my adopted planet." He's a big lug, but at least he's putting his big lug to use, his big lugness to use to try to save some innocence.
I'm just looking here. They did show up in that Kurt Busiek 2-issue Justice League story. That was that before or after that DC annual? I can't remember.
What was?
Do you remember Kurt Busiek? He wrote during the Detroit era.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote 2 issues of it was kind of supposed to be the last JLA-JSA team-up story. It was called The Family Crisis. And actually it happened right before JLA Detroit hit. And the crime syndicate showed up like in 1 or 2 panels. That was it. They were stuck in the bubble.
You know what? I'm remembering the Crisis on Earth Prime crossover now. You remember that? It was between the Justice League of America series and the All-Star Squadron series? Yeah,
that was back a couple years prior to this. Yeah.
Yeah, so now I'm trying to remember if that came before or after the DC Comics Presents Annual I was just talking about. Well, we'll find that out in a sec here.
Yeah. While you're talking about that, what's kind of tied to while you're looking at it, tied to that annual, I did not know of Alexander Luthor before this issue. Because I had not read that. I don't even think I owned that annual that you're looking up prior to this. I was collecting DC Comics Presents, but the mom and pop store that I bought comics from they would hold the annuals behind the counter because they were a little more expensive. And if I didn't know that they were out, they wouldn't tell me. So I probably missed it. So seeing Luthor here, for all I knew, I thought he was new for this series, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. A hero? Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, he was all but new. He'd only had one other appearance before this, and
yeah.
So you hadn't missed much, but the little you'd missed was all there was to miss, unfortunately. Yeah, I've just found the Crisis on Earth Prime story was All-Star Squadron number 14 and 15 and Justice League of America 207, 208, and 209. It all happened in 1982, which was the same year that DC Comics Presents annual came out. So it probably did happen maybe a couple of months after that story. And then the whole story, it was one of those weird stories that erases itself when it's over and done with, which is kind of what Crisis is, too, come to think of it.
Right.
So in a way, it didn't really count because in the end it didn't happen. But still, so there was one other crime syndicate appearance between that annual. And in any event, the only crime syndicate member who appeared in that annual was Ultraman himself. And it was also the first appearance of Luthor of Earth 3.
Right. So
we get a little bit of Owlman and Johnny Quick here, who always seems to be called Johnny Quick, both names. They don't seem to want to call him just Johnny for whatever reason. And they're just kind of standing around, acting as Greek chorus to their own universe's death. There's a lot of that happening in this series throughout. I've always been interested in on the top right-hand side of page 5 when Johnny Quick says, "But now we're going to die just like the rest of the chattel." So Johnny Quick's the little blurb about him in the Crime Syndicate's entry in Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe, just describes him as an arrogant super speedster. You can kind of see the arrogance coming through in a remark like that. And below that, he whines, "Why? Why did the gods give us these powers if we can't use them to save our own lives?" Which leads you to wonder, is polytheistic paganism a major religion on Earth 3? Why is he making reference to the gods here? Is this a cultural difference? Did Wolfman just think that sounded more like something out of a Greek tragedy, maybe, if he had Johnny Quick mention multiple gods instead of just the one?
Well, and what is it with Earth 3? The whole thing of...
well, yeah, there are some big historical differences. It was like actor Abraham Lincoln shot President John Wilkes Booth.
The British...
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
Invaded America, or no.
Discovered, the North America discovered Great Britain.
Right.
So, yeah, it's... when we went over to London for the first London Super Comic Convention back in 2012, I was sharing a pint with some of our British listeners. And at some point they made some good-natured little rib about the United States, and I'd said to them, well, just remember, on the evil parallel Earth of Earth 3, we colonized you.
Well, that's it. But that's interesting, though. Like, who were the natives on Earth 3 that colonized? Maybe that is precedence for why they say the gods give us those powers.
I don't even know how Earth 3's history could be anything like Earth 1's or Earth Prime's if that's the way things went. It's really just those details like Lincoln shooting Booth and America colonizing Europe. Those are just random little things that whoever wrote that, it was probably Gardner Fox, just threw in there like little bizarro world, like little bits of bizarro business just to add texture and to make the kids reading, who are assumed to be reading the stories, laugh. Yeah.
The Morrison Earth 2 book, though, wasn't there something about their money? It said something like is it Memnon or something like that? We trust.
Oh, Mammon.
Mammon,
right?
Yeah.
Who's a god associated with greed and venality. Is it like a god of lucre? So Mammon is often used as a figure of speech. He's like a metonym for just greed, and particularly corporate greed.
Is he from a certain? As from the New Testament?
Well,
I guess?
Yeah. He's like a pre-biblical. It's like an old pagan god from the Middle East.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
okay.
So people who are said to who have devoted their lives and have sold their souls to the mighty dollar, they're said to be worshippers of Mammon. That's why. And while we're on the subject of antimatter religions, characters on the antimatter Earth would often say God below instead of God above.
Some of that other negative reinforcement here when Luthor tries to try to warn Superwoman right away. She's, Luthor, what do you want? And then she dies. Emphasizing the you as if she's being very smarmy and, oh, what do you want?
Yeah, the last person I want to be helping me.
Yeah. And there again, the way she dies, it's literally being erased.
Just reduced to the rough sketches, the blue lines, as you said, and then gone.
Yeah.
The first name character to die in all of Crisis on Infinite Earths. You asked me that as a trivia question once.
That's right.
There she is. It is Superwoman, who is definitely not. Those of you who've read Grant Morrison's JLA Earth 2 graphic novel that we were just talking about, on that version of Earth, that antimatter Earth, that version of the crime syndicate, Superwoman is Lois Lane. But on Earth 3 pre-crisis, that clearly was not the case, as we'll see on the next page.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I was going to ask you about that, too. I wondered where that came in, and did she ever have a name pre-crisis beyond just Superwoman, or was she? I
don't think she ever did. I don't think we got much of her background.
Okay.
She had a lasso that could change shape. Which is something I'm sure in some stories Wonder Woman's lasso could do that if the writer felt it was convenient. Right. But most of the time it couldn't. But that was apparently the primary property of Superwoman's lasso.
Yeah. You can see it there on page 5. It is there. It sort of blends into the cape, but in the fourth to last panel, it's right there at her hip.
Never even gets a chance to use it.
Yep.
But yeah, I take your point about the way she's bracing up that wall of rubble, though. She looks more or less like Wonder Woman, but it's more rough-hewn, It doesn't have Wonder Woman's grace. She looks angrier and more savage. So yes, Perez knows his way around body language.
And then we get on page 6 and 7, when you were reading from your thesis, I didn't have a phrase for it, and it's probably not the right phrase either, but, in every great DC thing or event or destruction, you got to have a Superman story, a creation myth, if you want to say, and we are certainly getting it here with the last survivor of a doomed universe, not even planet, but a doomed universe.
Mm-hmm.
I love the spin on the Superman thing. Again, if you're familiar with DC, this is going to resonate, right? And it certainly resonated with me. And it's like, oh my God, yeah. Oh look, yes, exactly. It's okay. Just like the original, just how superheroes started with the birth of Superman, doomed baby going into a rocket. It's almost like the DC universe, it's getting its own sort of castaway.
Figures on Earth 1, a Superman makes that journey, but I'm pretty sure that in the Earth 3 reality, Ultraman came to Earth 3 as an adult. And yet here we have a Luthor escaping Earth as it's the lines between the mirror logic of Earth 3 and that of Bizarro World are sometimes kind of difficult to draw. But, yeah. So, yes. So here on page 6, the first thing that Luthor of Earth 3 says is gone as if she never existed about Superwoman. Lord, though we battled time and time again, I never wanted her to die like that. And how many Crime Syndicate adventures did we miss between DC Comics Presents Annual #1 and this? Only 3 years' time, and apparently that was when Earth 3 Luthor first appeared, and not only when he first appeared, but when he first got the idea to put on a costume and battle the Crime Syndicate. So that was not only his first appearance, it was his origin story. And he got the idea to put on a costume and fight the Crime Syndicate from Earth 3's own version of Lois Lane. And she makes her entrance into the Crisis story on this page also. Oh, and I guess we should also point out that back on page 5, when we first see Luthor of Earth 3, he mentions the word antimatter.
Yeah.
So that's when we finally learn that that's what this white stuff is that's wiping everything out.
That wall of antimatter dissolves all it touches. I really would love to piece together all the various Jor-El and Lara scenes and see how much of this dialogue here is sort of on the nose, you know. Our son is so young, he's been cheated out of living and knowing love. Alex, must he perish too? Come with me quickly, there's little time. There's hope, which is definitely a word that's always used with a Superman origin. There must be, without hope, all is lost.
And even as he says that, the next thing we see on the next panel is two longtime characters ceasing to exist.
Yeah.
And they are lost.
And I love how he continues, because it's very again, it's sort of similar, like as if Jor-El was saying, the first time I learned that Krypton was going to explode, I thought of a way, I strove to find a way to get us off this planet. This is only big enough for, all of it, we will die, but our son shall live, right? Like, where did Wolf, is he making it up on his own, or did he actually use some dialogue from previous Superman origin stories? I would love to make that comparison.
I don't know if Wolfman went back and actually looked at any actual Jor-El and Lara scenes.
He got the beats, though.
Yeah.
All the beats are there, yeah.
No, he's got the tone right. Okay, so we've got the death of Owlman and Johnny Quick. And again, Owlman's not just saying Johnny, he's saying Johnny Quick. Johnny Quick! Barely time to finish his sentence, and yet he's using the character's full name. It's just strange.
And then, in all this destruction, Pariah shows up. And he actually talks to Power Ring and Ultraman, and we don't get much information on here, but it's just another way to sort of spotlight the villains. He says, Pariah says, I mourn for this world about to die. And as you said, Power Ring, then you cause this, I'll kill you for it. Right away, he's just right to his roots.
Right. Yeah. Just head straight for violence. Because that's the way the crime syndicate have lived. They've lived by the sword, and now they're going to die by the blank page. And Pariah responds to this threat of violence by simply saying, "No, mine is not the hand which slays worlds. I can do nothing more than cry." Not exactly a forceful personality that Pariah has.
No.
But, when I met George Perez in my Pariah costume some people listening probably don't know this, but I dressed up as Pariah. It was a Halloween costume a bunch of years ago for those of us who were put on the Comic Geek Speak show. We used to get together at our friend Shane's house for a costume party once a year. And one year I dressed up as Pariah. And then a few of us cosplayed at the New York Comic Con, and I wore my Pariah costume again and introduced myself to George Perez. And he told me that as he drew Pariah scenes, he used to sing to himself, "And they call the wimp Pariah," and they call the wind Mariah from Paint Your Wagon.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And this is on page 7. That's the first time we get that name. He says, "I am called Pariah."
And he mourns for this world about to die.
Although, who's calling him Pariah? Just himself. It's not like he's talking to people.
That's a good point. Who else gets the chance to call him Pariah?
Right.
They die a couple of seconds after they meet him.
Yeah.
So, I guess that's something he invented for himself. I guess to keep himself sane, I suppose he had to craft this little personal mythology around himself.
It's a little self-indulgent, right? Like,
yeah, he's valorizing his own sadness.
Yeah.
He's totally emo.
Purple hair and all.
Right. The black eye makeup. Man, that was not a part of my Pariah costume that I enjoyed.
More dialogue, more Jor-El, Lara, Superman, Kal-El dialogue, on page 8 there. "My love, as the world ends, our hopes and prayers live on. I know where other heroes live, they will care for our son."
So referring again to that DC Comics Presents annual, in which Luthor of Earth 3 was lucky enough to meet the Supermen of Earths 1 and 2, as they teamed up with him against the Luthors of Earth 1 and 2 and the Ultraman of Earth 3.
And I can't help but really sort of just look at all this dialogue and think, because he says here, right in page 8, the second to last panel, our time together has been all too brief. Yeah.
Yeah. Since 1982, when that annual came out.
Yeah.
So apparently you had plenty of time to battle the crime syndicate a bunch of times, but you haven't been with Lois all that long. Yeah, that was when Lois of Earth 3 and Luthor of Earth 3 first kind of met, because Lois found out about the scheme that the two Luthors and Ultraman had, and she went to Luthor and asked. Apparently she'd done a story on him at some point, because she's a reporter on Earth 3 too, and knew that he was like a leading scientist, a major genius, and thought that maybe he could come up with something to stop this scheme, and Luthor responded by putting on this costume and using his science to fight the syndicators. And that's how these characters came together. And then Lois, for her part, says, "And you've given me more love than I had any right to expect, my husband," which leads you to wonder what kind of shady things were going on in her past. I mean, she is the Lois of Earth 3, so if that's a moral mirror world, if the Lois of Earth 1 is a good, decent person, then what's been going on in the checkered history of Lois of Earth 3? Yeah. Interesting note here. This is one of the few times when I've found comicbookdb.com, which is one of my favorite online resources for comics research. They got something wrong. Lois of Earth 3 actually did not make her first appearance in that same annual with Luthor of Earth 3, the DC Comics Presents Annual number 1. She first appeared in Secret Society of Supervillains number 14. There was a crossover story where the Secret Society on the lam from Earth 1 accidentally found themselves on Earth 3, had a run-in with 3 members of the crime syndicate, and Captain Comet, who was like the antagonist of that series. He was always chasing the Secret Society and trying to bring them to justice. He found his way to Earth 3, was injured there, and Earth 3 Lois Lane found him, brought him to a hospital, and helped nurse him back to health. There was a little bit of romantic tension between the two of them there. And then the next time you see her is that DC Comics Presents Annual by Marv Wolfman, when she recruits Luthor to thwart the other Luthor's scheme and gets him to become a hero. And then the two of them get together romantically and apparently marry and have a kid. So she seemed to be a fairly upstanding young woman in that issue of Secret Society of Supervillains. But you never know. If maybe she did some things in her youth that she wasn't proud of, some seedy Earth 3 stuff.
Yeah. Part of that, I wonder if, obviously Comic Book DB is user driven. So
it's crowdsourced stuff. So
yeah, they probably neglected to put her in there. But isn't it also too that isn't that series usually meant to take place? It's not apocryphal, but it's sort of not exactly in continuity usually. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not, right?
Secret Society of Supervillains?
Yeah. I used to get I'd have to find the article where I read that, where because of certain things that happened within it, it's also where we get isn't that where the one Star Sapphire, she's not quite the same?
Oh, right, Debbie Darnell.
Yeah, or is that
Yeah, she speaks with a French accent the first time she appears, and that sort of drops somewhere along the way. But yeah, she was supposed to be a stewardess, a flight attendant, Debbie Darnell.
Right.
That was her other identity. And
she does show up later in right around Infinite Crisis and all that too. But
right.
Yeah. I always got the feeling that series was sort of just left of center off the main line, but I'd have to find out where I heard that from.
Yeah, I'd never heard that myself, but then again, I've always loved the Secret Society of Supervillains series. It's one of my favorite little Bronze Age oddities, and I just kind of want it to count. So
yeah, right. It's in your personal continuity.
Exactly. Yes, my Riosian personal continuity.
I also like that we've seen all these people die, but tragically. But the Luthors get a farewell kiss. Right. They go out a little peacefully, more or less.
Right, a beautiful death.
Yeah.
The last words they speak are "I love you."
Outside of Morrison's Earth 2, we don't see these characters ever again, right?
Well, I think maybe in Infinite Crisis, when Alex Luthor is recreating the various parallel Earths and indiscriminately merging them together again, I think you do see a glimpse of his father with his red goatee and his helmet.
Okay. So then we get, you want to go on to page 9?
Sure.
A little bit of interesting, different point of view of seeing how that antimatter, we can start calling it the antimatter wall now, is wiping out the remaining portion of Earth 3. It's always interesting, too, that the universe dies when the Earth of that universe is absorbed, right? I mean, I know
that's the last thing to go.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, storytelling reasons.
Yeah, and Jeff Johns gets into that a little more with Infinite Crisis, revealing that the Earth is like the linchpin of all reality, and it's the most important world in every universe, except for the one universe that contains Oa. Right,
yeah. But I love how the ship that they put little Alexander Luthor Jr. on, how Perez has him, he's flying out of a panel before it can get absorbed, and flying through these, not even breaking the boundaries of the panels, floating over them.
Yeah, it seems to be turned into a trail of energy.
Yeah,
like a kind of a long lightning strike. So yeah, it's not breaking through a panel so much as it is phasing through it.
Yeah. And just barely missing the encroaching blackness, which the foreshadowing that you were called it before.
Right. Clearly a tendril of black smoke moving as if directed to consume and engulf the entire panel.
Yeah. And this was the sequence here, this sequence of seeing this vessel flying out, and with later dialogue that kind of made me think, so, and I think I knew this, but I guess it never really sort of cemented, but that just like, I think in the Marvel Universe, they say that there really is only one negative zone, and regardless of what reality you are in, if you go to the negative zone, it's always the same negative zone, I think. And I wonder if that's sort of the same here, is that even though there's a multiverse, if you go to the antimatter universe, it is the same antimatter universe, no matter which Earth you've come from.
Right, I think so. Actually, the aforementioned Cage Gnarly hit me up a little while ago to ask me if there was ever any mention of like multiple antimatter universes or just the one antimatter universe, and I'm pretty sure that there never has been more than the one.
Right.
At least not more than one at a time. You know what I mean? Because later on in this story, the antimatter universe is actually destroyed. The Antimonitor converts it to energy and consumes it in order to power his trip back to the dawn of time. Mm-hmm. But then by the finale of the series, the antimatter universe has been reconstituted, just like the positive matter single universe has been.
Right.
So, but I don't think there's ever been an antimatter multiverse. Like you said, it's always just the same antimatter universe, no matter what point of access you use to reach it.
Yeah. And the little vessel carrying Alexander Luthor winds up on a inactive JLA satellite above the Earth, because at this point,
the JLA are into their Detroit bunker era.
Right. They just went through a whole Martian Earth war.
Involving the white Martians, right?
At this point, no. The Martian Manhunter had been away for a while. He hadn't been on the team for a long time, and he comes back to the Justice League, and chasing him are just a group of regular green Martians, and he has a big battle with them, and they destroy the satellite. And I'm looking at the covers here, and it's Green Martian versus Green Martian. So I don't think the white Martians, was that a Morrison thing for JLA, or was that before that?
Oh no, there were definitely there had been white Martians skulking about in the DC universe before Morrison.
Okay.
He was just picking up on an earlier plot thread. The name Commander Blanks stands out in my mind as the name of one of the leaders of the White Martians.
Okay. Yeah, that was I was in Justice League at that time. Jerry Conway and Chuck Patton, and that whole Martian war thing, and all of a sudden the satellite just got destroyed, and you're like, what? What's going on? Just really flipped me out. So I love that it's being touched on here. Yeah.
A little craft that shows up there. It looks like a child's top, and it is actually overtly described in the text as a top. But the top spins onward, vibrating between dimensions, moving from one that is dead to one that soon might be. So yeah, it's supposed to. It's back on page 8. You can see it spinning around in place.
Mm-hmm.
The motion lines there. So it's instead of a rocket ship, it's a top. It's like a child's toy. You can read that as a symbol of lost innocence, I guess.
Well, I guess that makes sense too, right? If it's going to go, it's sort of established within DC Universe that to transverse worlds, you got to do it vibrationally, and I think doesn't he even say it, something about vibrations and
yep, vibrating between dimensions,
right? And a spinning top that kind of makes sense. It doesn't have to be rocket propelled; it needs to be something else propelled. I strove to find some way to bridge the vibrational gap which separates us.
Yep, but I guess it must also move from spot to spot because it has to. It's clearly taking off. That's going straight up into the air. It's because he wants it to go to. It has to find a point in orbit around Earth 3 that is analogous to the point in orbit around Earth 1 where the JLA satellite would be.
Right. Yeah.
So it's both a spaceship and it's a transmatter cube, I guess.
Right.
Transmatter top.
The headquarters has been abandoned and its electric life ended. Oh, poor satellite.
Right. Well, poor Alex Luthor.
Yeah, just stranded there.
Stuck there amid that scene of desolation. A scene that's echoed now that I think of it. I mean, isn't it at the beginning of Infinite Crisis? Isn't there a confrontation between Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman amidst what's left of the JLA Watchtower?
That is correct. That scene is sort of what I use to base my idea that unlike Crisis, what you just talked about, how you said Crisis really belongs to every character or no character or whatever. I really felt that if you look at you could look at Infinite Crisis as really being Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman's story because of that scene, and then it ends with that scene and. All of their different families are being affected during the thing, and it really. When I gave it a reread with that under that sort of microscope, it became a whole other story, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Well said, and I completely agree. Yeah. Tale of the trilogy, of the Trinity.
Trinity, yeah.
Also a tale of the rest of the DC universe, but yeah,
sure.
Core. Yeah. It's about reconciling the Trinity one to another.
Yeah. 10 and 11? Let's see where we get on these next 4 pages, and see where we go. Because let's at least get to something close to seeing the Monitor or the main point of this story.
No, we don't have much further to go for that, sure.
Yeah.
Well, we get a nifty little Peresian transition here. There's a little segue at the bottom of page 9. All right, so we've got a dead satellite, quote, while elsewhere another satellite burns with life. And so we get an image of a little, it kind of looks like a heavenly body, possibly even the sun. But as you look at it more closely, it might actually be another spherical entity floating out there in space. One that we've seen many times before.
The satellite.
Right. The one that's been popping up all over DC Comics throughout the whole of 1984. And finally, the scene shifts over there again.
The summoning.
The summoning. Very ominous sounding, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Again,
and we finally... Go ahead.
Apocalyptic terminology once again. It makes you think of Gabriel showing up at the end times and blowing his horn to signal the beginning of the battle between good and evil and to resurrect the dead, which is something that's supposed to happen in some apocalyptic folkloric traditions. Some biblical scholars think that's what's going to happen. So, the summoning, it's just got that ominous ring to it that makes you think about something really bad about to happen. Might just be the primal fear of being summoned to the principal's office, too. Anyway, it's a good title for the first issue here. It tells you about the gathering of characters that's about to happen, and it just generally sounds ominous. So there you go.
And what's a monitor satellite without a whole bunch of monitors, right? Just two big monitors right there across the 2 pages, and a whole slew of little circlets with various scenes of either different landscapes and destruction, and we're at Earth 1. This is, even though we have the previous page it says Earth 1, so we're back on familiar territory.
Oh yeah, because we transfer from the JLA's satellite, which is definitely orbiting Earth 1, to the Monitor satellite, and aboard Monitor satellite we can see through one of those big windows the JLA satellite in the distance. So, yep, no doubt about it, this is definitely Earth 1. And as you pointed out earlier, Peter, there's a caption right there that says July 1985.
Right.
Still a couple of months in the future for those reading it, who read this as it was published.
And the closest image, I guess, so far that they're up on the upper panels in the middle there. If we, that's about as clear an image of the Monitor that we will get until the final page of this issue, anyway.
Extreme close up of his face,
and those brows of his.
Oh yes.
Got to make mention of the creative team. We finally got the creative team listed here. Written and edited by Marv Wolfman.
Mm-hmm.
Penciled by George Perez. Inked by Dick Giordano. Lettered by John Costanza. Colored by Tony Tollin. And the plot by Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, and
Bob
Greenberger.
Bob Greenberger, yep.
Robert Greenberger, yeah.
Yep. Who were originally Wolfman and Wein were supposed to co-write this thing. I'll call this your crisis fun fact here, but then Wein was being seduced more and more by the companion volume, the Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC universe, and Rob Greenberger, who's a big comics historian, trivia buff. So Wein and Greenberger ended up just splitting off and concentrating all their energies onto the Who's Who series, and Wolfman was left to script the thing by himself. But apparently with some lingering plot input from Len Wein and Bob Greenberger.
Yeah. Just to go along with some things that I've read about the creative team, I remember Perez talking about going into a comic store and picking this issue up, and this paper I think it's called Flexograph or something like that, where they were just trying it out on this, and it was supposed to be this new paper, and it was supposed to be hardier and, better quality, and all he could see were all the color separations gone wrong, all that magenta all over the place, and not quite lining up. I don't know what your copy's like, but even later on, you can just see some real big mistakes on page like 19. Characters, their skin tone isn't even on there, and some colors not quite hitting the border, and Perez was pissed because whatever this new process was, it just butchered it, just really butchered it.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm looking at page 19 now, and like the upper lip of Ted Cord is whited out, and there's a big patch of white flesh on Harbinger's back on the second panel of the top row.
That's interesting, because in mine it's the whole half of the page. They're just white. They're all white. And the double page spread of all the heroes on page 26 and 7, on the left, every skin tone is almost white. There's no peach color until you see Simon on the right there. So he, like Superman's symbol, it's all yellow instead of being yellow and red, and his cape is yellow. It's like the red just got sucked out.
Well, I must have a better edition than yours.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any of those problems you're describing.
Yeah, mine is, and it wasn't until I got, the trade, or I do have here the Millennium Edition that they put out of Crisis #1.
Oh, right. Part of that whole series of Millennium Editions of key issues.
Yeah, and they updated the coloring a little bit here. in there. So I was like, oh, I guess, that's... I should really pick up another issue, a couple issues, and see just how different it is. Mine is really reflective of that problem.
Well, there's one good argument for reading this series in trade, I guess, because I also have open on my lap here the hardcover slipcase edition, the one that came with that with the wraparound Alex Ross painted cover on the book jacket. And it's one of the things that they did was they amended a couple of things, fixed a couple of typos, but they also recolored the whole thing, and it does look a whole lot better.
Yeah, and I've taken some notes about who is inking which issue and what they bring to the table or what they take away from the table, and also the colorist changes midway through the series. So this issue with Dick Giordano, not quite the Perez 100% visuals that we would get with obviously when Jerry Ordway gets on the book, it really becomes what I think is the look of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Dick Giordano takes away a little bit of some of Perez's line work, or I should say you see a little bit too much of Dick Giordano, He always has an inking style that I seem to always kind of go, oh yeah, there's Dick Giordano. And it's not like, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just, when you look at the cover detail and then you look at the inside, when Perez inks himself, or when you get an inker on him that really helps to embellish his artwork, it's a much more natural fit. I don't think Giordano was a good fit for Perez.
But hey, he was executive vice president of the company, so
yeah, he probably said, "I'm getting my name on this somehow."
I think he was one of those who had a lot of input into just the decision to go forward with this project in the first place. I don't know how much impact he had on the plot, but it's the basic idea of rebooting and retooling the continuity.
And
he was definitely involved in that in some major way, because he said as much in some of his Meanwhile columns.
They certainly had to go through him and Jeanette Kahn about who they were going to kill off and change and all that. Yeah.
And Jeanette Kahn was very game about all of that. Yeah. That's one thing that if we can go back to the Marv Wolfman's text piece essay here, he says he has to give recognition to Jeanette Kahn, who quote, insisted we be more daring, more bold, not to be afraid to make even larger and more significant changes. To that end, she suggested several ideas which absolutely stunned us. And about Giordano, since we're on that subject, he serves not only as inker for the Crisis, but is a DC vice president. His guidance, ideas, and general trust in this project made it a reality. Straight from Wolfman there.
So we finally get Perez's version of Lila. What do you think?
Well, she's a rather more modest dresser than we've seen at some other points. Lost some of the... Lonnie Anderson hair and posturing. Yeah, so she now comes off as, more brooding and ethereal. Got that long flowing cloak or robe that she wears with the funny, magenta, again, as you said. There's magentas bleeding all over the place, and Lila's probably most to blame. And those weird hippie fringe sleeves she's got going on there.
Yeah. I love her dialogue. It's so against most of her other appearances that we've seen here, right? Where she says, "I'll do as you ask, but I suggest you remember we are equals. I will no longer tolerate being treated as your slave."
Or your secretary, apparently.
Yeah.
Or go on.
I was going to say, or her bimbo.
Yeah, it runs counter even to a couple of appearances of hers that Wolfman wrote. So apparently Wolfman had... he wrote a couple of those Monitor cameos leading up to all of this. So I think his idea... I think I read someplace, and I probably mentioned this in one of our Monitoring the Monitor episodes, that a memo circulated to the creative teams of the various DC series that were going to feature Monitor cameos, describing the Monitor, his appearance or lack thereof, and his motives, and also a little something about his aide, Lila, and I think the phrase "dumb bunny secretary" was actually used. She's clearly not that anymore.
No, I mean, and she's so very obviously a entryway for readers for all of our questions, right? You know, I failed to understand. Go ahead.
She seems more like a magician's apprentice at this point than she does a secretary of any kind, dumb bunny or otherwise.
Yeah, why not both Supermans and Wonder Womans? Why not the most powerful?
Which is a very valid point, and I'm sure one that a lot of comics readers were asking themselves, or would be asking themselves as they see which characters actually are selected for this OA team. And Monitor gives his in-story answer, and we've already given our extra-textual answer to the question of why they didn't just go with all the heavy hitters.
Right. I do like what he says, too, about, you know, so he says, our greatest hope lies with both so-called heroes spelled wrong, Heros as opposed to Heroes, and villains fighting alongside each other. But then he says, yet another alternative has been made available, one I could not have expected. So even, you know, that was another note that I had as I'm reading through these issues is what exactly is Monitor's plan? And it, you know, even from here, it's already changed.
Yeah, what exactly is Marv Wolfman's plan?
Yeah.
It changed in mid-swing a bunch of times during this series.
Really? It really did, and it's sort of keeping track of that has been comical.
Yeah, we have milked a few yucks out of it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned the misspelled word heroes, because that is an example of something that was fixed in the hardcover edition of Crisis.
Okay.
If they respelled it Heroes.
So what does he say? Lila energized now while I retrieve the infant sent from Earth 3. And here's our first of many probably parallels to the whole problem that we're dealing with. You know, one becoming many and each one being weaker than the original, you know, where we finally see how Lila has been able to go across the DC universe all at once because she is able to replicate her body as Harbinger.
You know, maybe some of her duplicates are smarter than others too. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. Although the differences always were when she was as Lila. So
right.
Yeah.
And she attired herself rather differently, like lavender. It's always magenta, but sometimes those cat suits she would wear were more orange in color, and they had these very, very swooping necklines. Not here, though.
I like this. She reaches deep within herself, deep to the center of her being, and she senses each atom within her as an independent force. The universe once divided into many parts, each one different, yet somehow weaker than the whole. Now each part suffers for that weakness, destroyed one after another, because the very fabric of their being is too weak for its total defense. And now she, like the universe, must replicate as well. She must divide her power among many, yet with each with power, yet each powerless as well.
So she becomes a microcosm for this allegedly vulnerable multiverse that Wolfman is trying to sell to us.
Which, you know, as a kid, I don't think I ever really got that. Like, I got the idea, I got the notion that she was splitting, but I never really probably fully understood the comparison there. So it's kind of, you know, fun looking back and really analyzing
just how hard it was hitting you over the head with it, and as a kid you just don't see it.
And to, you know, okay, so we met Pariah, now we're meeting again. If you haven't read anything before this, you're meeting the next big player in this thing, and
arguably, even if you have been reading the Monitor appearances, you're still meeting this character for the first time, because
that's true. Good point.
So different from the Lila that we'd seen in those cameos.
Yeah. And, you know, her name sort of, both of their names, Pariah and Harbinger, sort of precede themselves. So they kind of give like a very blank sort of, or one note kind of personality to them. Pariah. Okay, that screams everything that we just talked about, that character. And Harbinger as someone, you know, almost like a herald, but yet there is a lot more to her even within this whole. It gives a reason why she should be the one that sort of understands what the hell is going on, because it's within her power to do so. And I like that. I like that their names are super descriptive and super, sort of like hitting you over the head, but you dig a little deeper and you go, oh, okay. So she's basically the example. She's the epitome of what's been going on. And because she goes through a few changes later on in later issues too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she kind of flip-flops a lot, and until she sort of stands up and finally takes charge, and it's kind of it was interesting to track her journey through those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yep, she does indeed go. She wears a lot of hats in this story, but here she's starting out as as I call her in my thesis, Nuntius Dei, which is fancy Latin for a messenger of God, a heralding angel sent to gather those chosen by her master in preparation for the end times. And she's off to the races.
Yeah.
But we don't see her. Well, before she really heads off, we have a couple of extra panels of the Monitor.
Right. Very important.
Top of page 13.
Yeah. He says, for months I've observed the multiverse and the many planet Earths. Months? Really? Just months?
Time is fluid. Time is relative.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about all those the Monitor issues, the earliest appearance was in New Teen Titans issue 22, 21, and that was well before the lead up to this, to where they really were showing up in the DC universe. It was like a 2-panel thing where Monitor is watching Raven and Starfire because there's some bomb at a baseball game or something like that. And I think, I'm not even sure if Lila was part of that.
Yeah, I think you only saw like an external shot of the satellite. Right,
and it was gray. It wasn't even gold. It was like silver or gray or something like that.
It changed colors a few times, but
yeah,
we've already covered how inconsistent coloring tended to be.
Yeah,
at this point in comics publishing history.
So that was a good 2, maybe even 3 years before this. So I think that's interesting. He says months, but in our time it's been years. And then he says, well, let's see. When all is ready, doubts begin to form. I see my own death as well as the death of worlds. The future comes as it will. I can only help prepare the many pathways it may take. The Luthor child, I need him now. The many pathways, the universe, it's that, talk about, what Wolfman was going through. He's like, look, here's my idea. Here's what I think should happen. I can prepare you for all of it. Well, what comes after, ultimately, I guess, is all up to you writers and you editors, and that's exactly what happened.
Good reading, Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that interpretation.
I wrote here, I said, boy, is the Wolfman thinking out loud or what? I think this might be a good place to stop. What do you think?
Okay, before Harbinger really gets underway with her mission to gather, to summon the selected.
Because now we're getting into sort of like a new part, and there's some new focus for this issue.
All right, so we won't get around to talking about the characters on the cover after all.
No, tease for next time.
Okay, well, let me throw out one or two minor things
Go
about
ahead,
the cover,
sure.
though.
Yeah.
You notice that all 5 members of the crime syndicate are depicted on that cover.
Yep.
It kind of looks to me, they're all fairly small and kind of tucked into little corners of the cover. I'm thinking that maybe Perez threw them in there as an afterthought. Like maybe they weren't part of his original design. Maybe it was originally just supposed to be the chosen 15 characters. And he just threw in the Earth 3 people just as a little going-away present, consolation prize. Yeah, you're going to cease to exist, but hey, you're on the cover. Especially like little Johnny Quick, you can barely see him. He's on the back panel of the cover. He's practically being pulled away into the big white spot up there by the chain of Earths.
And you really have to look at Owlman and sort of go, oh, yeah, that's not Batman because his boots are different and he has no gloves.
I don't know. There's all I can see looking at that is a big smudge shaped like my thumbprint. So is there a white cord connecting his wrist to his back? I think that is supposed to be a part of Owlman's costume, I think.
No. But he definitely, he has those boots that sort of fold over, those Alex Raymond type boots. Whereas Batman has swashbuckling, or these are swashbuckling boots.
Right. But, Batman's are skin tight.
Yeah. So.
Gotcha. Okay, and, well, yeah, I don't need to say anything about any characters we haven't been introduced to yet. But yeah, just looking at the image of Harbinger in full costume there, just kind of standing in the midst. She's the only one that seems detached from the chaos surrounding her. She's just kind of standing there dispassionately observing everything. Well, Pariah, he doesn't seem to be rocked by the same waves of cosmic impact as the others either, but he's at least emotionally moved by it. So they're kind of at opposite corners of the image and at opposite ends of the emotional spectrum. One of them is fully in the throes of grief and terror, and the other one is just kind of standing there. And I'm just looking at those white lines extending from her head, like those staff lines going off to the right. Totally 80s.
Harris loved, he loved to do stuff like that. If you look at some of his pinups that he did for like New Teen Titans or for, did you ever see his Justice League cards, little postcards?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, there's about 16 of them, all featuring a different member of the Justice League, except for like the Hawks. They're together, and the last one is all the 4 new characters from the Detroit era, and it's very designy in that way. Where there's a design element that'll connect the background or a shape of something, and he was really big on that in this time frame.
Yeah, sort of graphic abstractions.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I can see that as a part of this cover, it kind of makes I'm like, yeah, that's Paris.
Yes.
Oh, another good example of that is I think it's Wonder Woman 300, where he does a pinup in there. And all the Amazons are holding up swords, and I think the design of the swords sort of blend into her double W chest plate, and blonde Hippolyta is actually formed out. Her face is formed out of clouds. Oh. So again, it's that sort of Paris-y, designy element that he likes to do. Well, okay, we got 10 pages. That's not bad.
Yeah. We've.
No, I'm sorry, 13.
Yeah. Well, 12 and a half. We haven't quite gotten down to the bottom half of page 13, where Solivar enters the story, but we will.
Oh yeah.
Have
newfound commitment.
Right. Well, this is the anniversary year. It's timely. We've got a reason to really press on with this now. Right. So have no fear, Crisis Faithful. We will be back with more annotation of this seminal text in the weeks and months to come. In the meantime, you can always stop by thecomicforums.com, where the inevitable talkback thread will be established, to let us know what you thought of this issue, share your own thoughts, your own recollections about Crisis number 1, the issues that we've raised here. And if you have any suggestions for how we might refine our approach in future installments, we'll happily listen to them.
Well, it was a pleasure talking Crisis with you again, Adam.
It is always a pleasure talking Crisis with you too, Peter.
Until next time.
Until next time, the world will continue to end. Good night, everybody.